So, welcome back to another episode of Flipped Spanish, Notes by Video. Today we're going to be talking about the uses of the infinitive. As you may remember, in Spanish, an infinitive is the form of the verb when it ends in AR, ER, or IR. Generally, what we do is we take an infinitive and we conjugate it, and that's how we use verbs. However, there are times when it's appropriate, if not even necessary, to use the verb in its infinitive form. So, let's talk about those times when you have to use an infinitive. First, when you have two conjugated verbs, that's a big no-no. The first verb will be conjugated. The second verb should remain as the infinitive. Okay? And there are certain verbs that you will often be using an infinitive after, and I've listed them on the slide under section number 1 for you. Okay, so just be familiar with those and know that if you're following them with another verb, that verb has to be in the infinitive form. Second of all, certain verbs of perception, in other words, verbs that have to do with the senses, listening, hearing, looking, seeing, feeling, are going to be followed by an infinitive even if there's a change in subject. Use an object pronoun in order to eliminate that need for a second clause. And if you look at the examples I've provided, te oigo hablar, pero no entiendo nada. I hear you talking, but I understand nothing. Basically the way you're feeling right now, okay? We don't need to put a second clause in because we put the te in there. I hear you. And then you don't use the gerund. You don't use the ando, iendo form of the verb. You're just using the infinitive after it. You got a conjugated verb, so next to it we put an infinitive, just like we talked about in slide number 1. Now, how do I get my next slide? Okay, part 3, verbs of influence. These are almost like indirect commands. We've got dejar, hacer, mandar, permitir, prohibir. And these are going to be followed by an infinitive, and you're going to do the same thing we just talked about with the verbs of perception. You're going to use a pronoun with them, an object pronoun, and that tells you who you're having do these things. Let's look at our example. La profesora nos hizo leer artículos sobre el ADN. The teacher made us read. Notice we're not using a dependent clause. She made us. Let me see if I can get my marker going here and point things out to you. Let's see. So she made us. We've got hizo for the made. Here's the us, and then read. Okay, she made us read. No dependent clause. We're using an infinitive, and we've got an object pronoun in there to signify who's doing these things. Then, number 4. The infinitive is used after impersonal expressions when there's no change in subject, and we've talked about that with the subjunctive. If your subject doesn't change, you don't need a dependent clause, again, and we're just using the infinitive. So, es importante estudiar. You've heard me say that in class before when doing different examples. Es importante leer. You don't need the que if you're not changing the subject. You can just follow it. If you want to specify that somebody else do this, it's important that you study specifically. You. Yeah, I'm talking to you right there. Then you're going to put in your que, you're going to use your subjunctive and all that jazz. Oh, one thing I just saw there before I click away. I-que and tener que are always followed by the infinitive. They're just expressions. I-que means it's necessary to, okay? And tener que, to have to do something. Hay que estudiar. It's necessary to study. Tienes que estudiar. You have to study. Tener que you've been working with probably since 7th grade. IK you may not be as familiar with, but it's a wonderful expression and will make you sound ever so educated. Go for it. Give it a try. Take it for a spin. All right, point number 5. As I mentioned a minute or two ago, the gerund form of the verb, talking, working, we don't do that in Spanish. Instead of saying hablando en clase es horrible, we would say hablar. Okay, so where you would want to say talking in your sleep is disruptive, we would say hablar. We would use the infinitive. That's just where Spanish is different from English. Very strange, I know, for a foreign language to seem, well, foreign, but it is. Point number 6, you can use an infinitive. Sometimes in place of a command, you'll probably see this more than you'll use it. You might see a sign that says no fumar. No smoking. Simple to understand. You'd pick up on it real quick, I'm sure. Sometimes they'll use infinitives when giving written directions instead of commands. When you're talking to someone, you're not going to talk in infinitives. You're going to use the conjugated command forms. This is something you're more likely to see than to actually use. And big one, big one. The 2 major uses of a infinitive. 1 after a already conjugated verb, and 2 after a preposition. Okay, therefore you have to know what a preposition is. The most common ones in Spanish are para, con, en, de, a, por. And after prepositions, you always use the infinitive. Okay, you have to. Para hablar, por gastar, por pagar, con hablar, whatever. It has to be followed by an infinitive. And there are certain verbs that require a preposition after them. Oh no. So A, you have to use an infinitive after a preposition, and B, you have to use a preposition after specific verbs. What verbs? Well, go look at Quizlet. There is a list of infinitives that take prepositions on Quizlet. You might have to search for it, but it's there. I've put it up there before. One example that I've used here on this slide, aprender a. If you're going to say to learn to do something, you have to put an a after aprender. Okay? So aprender a plus infinitive. And again, there's a whole list of these verbs on Quizlet. Do you need to know them for the quiz next week? Yes, you do. You must memorize which verbs take which prepositions, because that will be on the quiz. And then last but not least, deber, de plus the infinitive. Deber can take the preposition de, and since de is a preposition, we're going to follow it by an infinitive, and it means probable. Okay, probable. It's another way of expressing probability. You can use the future tense in Spanish to express probability, or you can use deber de followed by an infinitive. Example, la bióloga, bióloga. It's Friday morning and I'm speaking Spanish and it's making no sense. La bióloga, I think that came out right, debe de anunciar sus resultados hoy. The biologist will probably announce her results today. All right, we don't need to use the future tense. We could just use deber de plus the infinitive. And if you do that, it will make you, again, sound very educated and intelligent. A native Spanish speaker would probably take a step back and say, whoa, somebody knows their Spanish. What an incredible Spanish teacher they must have had. Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to say. So, that's all for now on uses of the infinitive. Please feel free to ask questions in class. You could ask questions right now. And if the computer answers you, please let me know about that, because that would be interesting. Until next time, signing off. Good day and goodbye.